Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to hear from Katie Brush. Katie has tutored with us for over a year, and she is a research associate at the Ecological Approaches to Social and Emotional Learning Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Today, she will be educating us all about the basics of social and emotional learning. A few notes for you all before we get started. For purposes of sound quality, all participants are currently muted. You may also wish to use headphones for better sound. You have the ability to ask a question at any time using the question pane. So you can simply type in your question and press send. We will be holding questions until the very end. And then at that point, I will choose some of them for Katie to answer. All right. Thank you for being here, Katie. I'm going to pass this off to you now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar on social emotional learning, or SEL, as it's commonly abbreviated. As Katie said, my name is also Katie, and I'm a social emotional learning research associate at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, and like Katie said, also a volunteer with School on Wheels. And so I just want to begin with a quick roadmap of what I'll be talking about today. First, I'm going to provide some background information on SEL, including what it is and why it's important. And then I will share some actionable strategies and steps that you can take to integrate SEL into your tutoring practice. And just to provide some context for this, I am a researcher, not a behavior management coach or SEL trainer, but my plan here is to provide just sort of a quick introduction to some strategies and practices that come out of the SEL research that I think might be particularly appropriate to tutoring settings. And then finally, I'll just conclude by leaving you all with a couple of resources that you can use to learn more about SEL beyond this presentation, if that is something that you're interested in. So without further ado, I'll just begin by describing a little bit about what social emotional learning is, including what skills it includes, and sort of how it works in practice. And so what do I mean when I say social emotional learning? What is it? It can mean a lot of different things to different people. It's related to and frequently conflated with a lot of other fields of study or popular interests and terms that you might have heard thrown around. That includes things like emotional intelligence, character, grit, 21st century skills, soft skills, that sort of thing. But broadly speaking, when I'm talking about SEL today, I'm referring to the process through which children and adults learn about and manage their own emotions and interactions in ways that benefit both themselves and others, and that help them to succeed in school, the workplace, relationships, citizenship, and just life in general. And that typically includes being able to do things like understand and manage your emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for other people, establish and maintain positive relationships, and also to make responsible decisions. And there are lots of ways to sort of think about and categorize and group the types of skills that are included in SEL. But at the lab that I work for at Harvard, the EASEL Lab, We like to think of the skills as being grouped into 6 broad domains. The first 3 sort of represent this set of skills and competencies. There are cognitive skills, which in younger kids include sort of regulatory skills, like being able to focus and pay attention, remember and follow instructions, even when there's a bunch of distractions going on, and stopping to think before you act. And in teenagers and adults, it's usually thought of as including more complex skills like being planful and organized, being able to monitor a lot of things all at once and shift between ideas, and also sort of the idea of having good self-control. For example, finishing your homework when maybe you would prefer to be on your phone or watching TV. And then next, there are emotion skills, which include things like recognizing how you feel and why, being able to control your feelings and how you respond to them, and then also being able to take the perspective of others in order to understand how they might feel in a particular situation. And then the third domain here are social skills, which include the body of skills and behaviors that are needed to build positive relationships and get along or work well with others. So that includes things like teamwork and cooperation, treating others with kindness and respect, peaceful conflict resolution, and so forth. And then these skills, we also like to think are accompanied by what we call a belief ecology, which is sort of a complicated term for saying it's basically the sort of set of knowledge, attitudes, and habits of mind that basically act as an internal guide for your behavior and choices. And so it includes things like beliefs about yourself and others and the world, your values, and your personality, things that are sort of innate to you. And the belief ecology is really important because the SEL skills on the left aren't inherently pro-social on their own. For example, research actually shows that people who engage in bullying are actually really good at perspective taking. They sort of know exactly what to say or do in order to hurt someone's feelings. So you can imagine that without sort of the values and beliefs that would guide you to act kindly and respectfully towards others, some of those SEL skills can actually be used to manipulate people or cause harm. And so it's important to sort of build both in tandem. And then importantly, I'll just touch on this pretty quickly. There's an entire sort of body of literature about all of this stuff, but development, culture, and context make a difference for how SEL skills are learned and used, which is just to say that in terms of development, children aren't born automatically knowing how to do all of these things. Different skills emerge at different points in time, and they change and build on each other over the course of a lifespan. And also, although it can be helpful to group skills into these sort of distinct buckets in order to understand and talk about them, the reality is that they are all interrelated. And so skills in one area sort of drive and influence skills in another. So for example, if you want to successfully engage in peaceful conflict resolution, you're going to necessarily need skills that allow you to manage your emotions and control your impulses and that type of thing. And then it's also important to note that SEL skills are really highly tied to culture. The expectations for how children should behave and which skills they'll need to be successful in life really varies from culture to culture and even from family to family and person to person. So it's important to look out for and sort of be mindful of those differences when you're helping children develop and use SEL skills. And then finally, SEL skills are sensitive to what is happening in the environment, which just means that it's harder for students to learn and use SEL skills in contexts where they feel unwelcome or unsafe. And I'll touch on this a little bit more throughout the rest of the presentation. With that in mind, I wanted to share sort of the two things that we think are really important for effective SEL, and not just we think, research says are important. And it actually, SEL involves two coordinated strategies. The first, as you might expect, includes sort of direct instruction in social emotional skills. And there are 4 evidence-based practices that can help you sort of directly teach students social emotional skills. The first is modeling, which means that sort of adults model and act out and live the skills that they hope children and teenagers will develop. The second is teaching, which means being sort of really direct and explicit about the ideas, vocabulary, and skills that you're modeling and sharing and how they're helpful and useful to students' lives. The third is practice, which just means providing students with actual opportunities to act on and practice the skills that they're learning, which generally means that skills are really integrated into everyday activities and interactions. You're not just teaching them in a lesson and then moving on, but you're sort of sharing them and using them in an ongoing way. And then the fourth is discussion, which just means sort of taking the time to talk about and reflect on what happens when a challenge arises, what skills you can use to address a challenge, and then how it went after you used them. And this really sort of reinforces the learning for kids and teenagers and allows them to sort of take the skill that they learned in one context and apply it. You know, if they're learning it in tutoring, they can apply it at home or in school, and so forth. And then secondly, SEL instruction also really needs to happen in safe and supportive contexts. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the environment in which kids are learning can either support or impede the development and use of SEL skills. And a child is much more likely to be sort of engaged and focused on learning, as well as willing to try out and practice new SEL skills if they're not also worried, stressed, or bored, and also when they respect and trust the people that they're learning from. And so for adults, this really means making sure we're able to stay calm and supportive when we're working with kids and to model those positive skills that we want to see them using. And so I'll share some specific strategies later on in the presentation that can help you sort of integrate these practices into your tutoring. But first, I just wanted to share a bit about why SEL is important, particularly for children and teens who are experiencing homelessness. So what does the research say about this? The big picture is that SEL skills are associated with a host of life outcomes related to things like physical and mental health, job and financial security, substance abuse, and involvement with the criminal justice system. So the skills that kids and teens learn when they're young really have sort of long-term outcomes for their health and success. And then in the shorter term, you might also imagine that it can be pretty hard for adults to teach and students to learn when kids are struggling with behavior and social emotional challenges. And so for that reason, providing students with opportunities to practice SEL also supports success in school by leading to improved classroom behavior, their ability to manage stress and depression, their attitudes about themselves, others, and school, and also just academic performance in general. And then especially important for children and teens who are experiencing homelessness, SEL skills also help people cope with negative life events and chronic stress. The flip side of that is also, though, that chronic stress can make it more difficult to develop access and use these social emotional skills. So in terms of children and teens who are experiencing homelessness, housing and food insecurity, and sort of all of the challenges that go along with that can produce high levels of stress and anxiety that is sort of commonly labeled toxic stress. And that's really the fact that as human beings, we sort of all get stressed out sometimes. And a lot of the time it's positive stress, which is part of our normal healthy development in that it sort of challenges us to think and grow in new ways. And at other times, it might even be a little bit more severe, but still manageable, either on our own or with some support from resources that are available to us. And that's sort of what's known as tolerable stress. But toxic stress, this sort of third category, is stress that is really strong, prolonged, and actually pretty harmful to our body. And basically, when we encounter situations that cause toxic stress, which include sort of experiences that threaten our physical or emotional safety, our bodies basically automatically shut down the decision or control center of the brain and let the more reactive emotional centers take over. And this is evolutionarily adaptive. If you sort of think about encountering a lion in the street, it would make sense that your brain would shut down higher order thinking in order to sort of focus on fight or flight survival. But that process can actually be harmful when it happens frequently in our everyday lives. Because when your brain is on high alert all of the time, it becomes harder to control your emotions, behavior, and so forth, and then can have also lasting effects on your physical and mental health. And unfortunately, research has shown that children who live in contexts where there is sort of persistent toxic stress often struggle with social emotional skills. And in fact, 1 in 5 kids who are growing up in poverty have an increased risk for social and emotional difficulty. But it's also really important to remember that this struggle is definitely not unique to low-income kids. All of our brains struggle to deploy SEL skills and related behaviors when we're under any kind of extreme stress. It's just harder to use what you know to plan and to access your sort of better judgment under difficult conditions, and that's just true for everyone. And one of the ways that SEL is really important is that it can provide kids and teens living with chronic stress with opportunities to practice slowing down those reactive centers of their brain by both reinforcing feelings of safety and calm, and also giving them the opportunity to practice strengthening that decision-making center of their brain by providing them with strategies that sort of reinforce and re-engage those cognitive and emotion regulation skills that chronic stress can make difficult. And so with that said, I will just briefly share some of the ways that you can integrate evidence-based SEL strategies into your tutoring sessions in order to provide students with that type of extra support. And I'll just note here that the types of SEL programs that are used in schools and in other similar educational settings are usually very structured and time intensive and tend to require a lot of resources and support. They're sort of taught in like 30 or 40-minute lessons. There's a lot of supplementary stuff that goes with them. And so in thinking about how to choose which strategies and practices to share with you today, I wanted to be really strategic about the sort of things that you can have control over and time for in sort of shorter weekly tutoring sessions. And so in doing that, I identified sort of 3 areas where I think tutors really have an opportunity to support SEL. And the first is helping establish those safe and supportive learning environments that I've been talking about that really give the kids and teenagers you're working with the opportunities to practice SEL skills in contexts that are trusting and minimize stress. The adult in the room in particular is a really important part of SEL. We're sort of in charge of setting the tone for the environment, and our actions and responses to things can either help create a calming space or add to what might be a stressful one. And so that's one area. And a second is developing strong relationships with students. I think there's a really good opportunity for tutors to be able to do this. And not only does that help support that positive learning environment, but research also shows that children who have positive relationships with adults just have more opportunities to practice SEL in general. And kids are typically more willing to learn and adopt behaviors from adults that they care about and trust. And then finally, I think there is an opportunity for tutors to really take advantage of what we call teachable moments to model SEL and teach skills in real time or in tandem with academics. So this means sort of having a set of go-to SEL strategies that you can quickly use to impart skills or address challenges as they arise during a tutoring session. And then to also sort of kill two birds with one stone by embedding SEL learning into your sort of regular academic instruction. And so now I'll dive into what some of those specific strategies and practices are that can help you accomplish these three things. But I also just want to note here that the team I work for can sometimes spend sort of entire day-long trainings or two-day trainings going over these strategies. So I'm going to move through them pretty quickly during this presentation. So I just ask that you sort of bear with me, and I'm also happy to share this PowerPoint or provide a summary handout later on if that would be helpful for people. Okay, so to begin with, you can help create a positive learning environment by trying out some of these evidence-based practices. The first one is to create a set of positive norms that you'd like to see at each tutoring session. This includes sort of writing down the behaviors and attitudes that both you and the student you're tutoring agree upon, things like coming prepared, trying your best, speaking to each other respectfully. And it's a good idea to have the student suggest and contribute ideas and have you both agree upon them. And that way you can refer back to these sort of agreed upon norms when challenges arise. A second thing that can help is to greet these students by their name when they arrive and just let them know in whatever way you want to that you're glad to see them, you're glad they're there. It's just a nice way to show that sort of you care and you're ready for them. And then a third thing is to notice and reinforce positive behaviors with encouraging words. And it's really important here to be specific. So instead of just saying excellent or good job, you could say something like, I noticed you remembered to fill out your homework tracker. Nice job. Or way to stick with that problem, even though it was a really tough one. I'm really proud of you. And it's also important to take time to call out effort and progress as well, not just perfection. It can take a long time to sort of get these skills right. I think even as adults, we're still working on them. And then another thing that can be really good to do is to get to know about their interests outside of just school and tutoring, and to also share about your own. Relationships are really reciprocal, so it's great for you to both be learning about each other. And then another thing you can do is to use, do your best to use a warm and positive tone or body language and so forth. And I'll go over an adult regulation strategy on the next slide that's designed to help adults stay calm and respond to challenging behaviors in productive and supportive ways that allow them to keep doing this even when they might be upset at something that happened or something else going on in their lives. And then finally, it's really important to celebrate success. This kind of goes hand in hand with reinforcing positive behaviors. It could mean a good grade or understanding a new concept, or something even smaller. Even small successes count, and progress and effort, again, are both good things to celebrate. And then another way that tutors can help create an environment that's conducive to social, emotional, and academic learning is to strive to be what we refer to as their best self rather than their stress self. This really gets at that sort of adult self-regulation strategy that I mentioned on the previous slide. It's essentially the idea that we also all experience stress in our lives. We may have had a hard day at work or hit traffic on the way to tutoring or just had a disagreement with someone we know that's gotten us sort of tense and riled up. And the truth is that we carry all of that into tutoring sessions with us. And like kids, our own SEL skills can become taxed when we're feeling angry or stressed. So it's important for adults to have regulatory strategies that they can use to avoid being our stressed self, which is reactive, negative, and punitive, and remain what we call our best selves, which are more calm, thoughtful, positive, and supportive. And there are lots of ways to regulate stress and emotions, which I'll get into a few slides from now. But, and everyone sort of has their own preferences for what works best for them. But one strategy that we like to share with adults, and also this works well for older kids as well, is to use a positive mantra to stay calm and supportive in stressful situations. And positive mantras are basically just something that you repeat over and over to yourself in your head in order to help replace negative thoughts with more positive ones, to calm you down and sort of keep you in the moment. And examples of that can include things like, this isn't her fault, she's still learning, or this isn't my fault, but I can help. And it can be really hard to sort of reset your thinking and calm down when something happens. But when we are our quote unquote best selves, it's easier to avoid speaking to students with a frustrated or angry tone, or to hand out punitive consequences, which is also really critical to building those good, strong relationships with students. And so another strategy that you can use to help build a positive relationship with your student is to begin every session with a check-in. And this may already be something you're doing to sort of figure out what you'll be working on that day or go over what their homework is. But you can also use this time really intentionally to build rapport with the student you're working with, and to show you're interested in learning about them, and to just generally start each tutoring session off on a positive note. And even if you don't have a ton of time, it's really good to make sure you begin every check-in by asking them how they're doing and following up with any relevant questions. It's just a quick way to show that you are listening to them, that you care about them, and that you're interested in developing that relationship with them. And if you have more time, you can also ask some of these more in-depth questions, like what was the highlight of your week, or what's new in your life? And these example questions on the right are all pulled from conversationstarters.com, which has a ton of different questions on all sorts of topics, from get to know you questions to more in-depth ones. And so that can help get you started if you're thinking about doing something like this. And then for people who want to take this to the next level, you can also have the student you're working with bring in a song or a picture or some sort of object that means something to them or reflects something that they've been feeling or thinking about lately. And you can do the same, and you can sort of have a small discussion around that that helps you get to know each other a little bit better. And so now I just want to shift a little bit into strategies that can be used to help students directly build their SEL skills. So less about creating that environment and more about direct instruction, although they're sort of mutually reinforcing. And think alouds are a really great, easy way for you to model successful SEL skills for students in real time. So think alouds are basically a strategy that gives voice to your own mental processes and allows you to share the strategies and skills you use to be successful in any given situation with the students you're working with. I think sometimes a lot of the processes or strategies that we use to apply our own SEL skills to situations, to do things like concentrate or maintain control of ourselves, problem solve, and that type of thing, they often happen in our head, sometimes without us even realizing it. And so without articulating how we use a particular skill, it might be hard for children and even teenagers to really understand exactly what it is they should be mastering. So for example, I think a lot of times we say to kids, we ask them to sort of focus or pay attention, but that might not actually mean much to them unless we articulate the thoughts, behaviors, and strategies that you can use to actually do those things. Things like looking at the person who's speaking to you or taking notes and so forth. And so explaining to students what we do when faced with similar challenges can help them learn to be successful in those situations on their own. And think alouds really involve two steps. The first is noticing and describing what you see occurring without judgment or anger. And then two, sharing what you think, say, or do in similar situations. So as you can see to the right, some examples of what a think aloud looks like might be, when I have to do something I don't like, I pretend it's a game or remind myself of the fun things I get to do when I'm done. Or another one could be, I can see it's really hard to be patient when I'm talking to another adult. When I need to sit still for a long time, I sing a favorite song silently in my head, or I doodle on a piece of paper. And so you can really use these as moments bubble up throughout the tutoring session. And I've also found that these actually work well for academic skills as well. And then another strategy that you can use to help students build skills is to provide them with emotion regulation strategies that help them to both stay focused on their learning during tutoring, and also that they can then take and apply to other situations in their lives. And the idea is that sometimes students might act out or shut down just because they aren't really sure how to effectively recognize, talk about, or manage their feelings. But there are some simple strategies that we can share with them to help. The first is that you can model and have students use what's called I messages, which are essentially sentence starters like the ones on the right that help students both notice and communicate strong feelings, like when they're getting angry or frustrated. And it helps them basically put a name to that feeling and identify its root cause respectfully without sort of placing blame or anger on another person. So for example, if a kid that you're working with says, I know, stop bothering me, you can ask them to sort of rephrase that thought with an I message to more clearly communicate how they feel and what they need from you in that moment. So it could be something like, I feel frustrated and annoyed when I'm reminded over and over to do my homework because I'm tired after school, and what I really need is a short break before I get started. It's worth noting that most people do not communicate naturally in iMessages. It's not really how we talk in everyday life. So you might need to model iMessages quite a bit before it catches on and kids feel comfortable with it. But it does get easier with practice and is a really good way to avoid hurt feelings and get your point across. It's used pretty frequently in sort of relationship and family counseling situations as well. So there's a whole sort of literature behind why it works. And then another thing you can do is model or have students use cool down strategies that help them gain control over their emotions. And you can have them do this before they deliver an iMessage or just in general anytime they're upset. And the idea is basically to help students stop, calm down, and think before acting or reacting to a situation. And common calm down strategies include things like the adult self-regulation mantra I mentioned on the previous slide, things like taking deep breaths, counting, or taking a yoga meditation, or just even a water break. And you can also do things like bring in a stress ball or Play-Doh that students can sort of manipulate throughout the tutoring session to get rid of tension. There is a whole body of this stuff online, lots of good resources for different breathing techniques, kid-appropriate yoga moves, and other cool-down techniques that I would encourage you all to explore. These are sort of strategies that come from research and evidence, but the way that you choose to do them is really dependent on how you and your student feel. And these calm down strategies can either be used, as I said, in the moment as needed, or you can also use them sort of more intentionally at the beginning of each tutoring session or when shifting to a new task or a new subject to just sort of get students refocused and ready to learn in a new situation. And then you can also combine cool down strategies with the think aloud strategy to share with students how you cope with intense, stressful emotions. So for example, you could say something like, that problem seems a little tricky. When I get frustrated with my work, I like to take a water break to calm down and let my brain rest. Then I can get help or try it again. Would you like to take a break? And these sound a little stilted because they are examples that I created out of nowhere, but you can definitely sort of say them in your own voice as well. And then finally, this is a slightly more time-intensive way of going about building SEL, but there's also lots of creative ways that SEL and academic skills can be built in tandem, which could be a really efficient way to integrate SEL into tutoring sessions. Two quick strategies that I've sort of pulled out that I think can be fit into this type of work and really aligned with academic aims include the WHOOP method, which is basically a short planning and goal setting activity that it helps students set a goal, identify really specific potential challenges to achieving it, and then come up with actionable steps to overcome those obstacles. And I've included links sort of at the end of this presentation to the instructions for this and templates like the one you see here on the right. And then there's also, I've included a link to a free app that's available for the WHOOP method that students can download and use to track their progress related to their goals. And it's important to note that this strategy can be used for anything, any goal. It doesn't have to be related to academics, but it's a really good opportunity to think about goals related to school, homework, or tutoring. And the next thing that can help easily integrate SEL instruction into academics are by using reading activities and books. They're a really great opportunity to pause throughout a book or story and ask about characters' emotions, behaviors, and choices. So if you're reading a book with pictures with younger kids, you can ask them to identify clues in the picture that let them know how someone is feeling. And that helps them sort of build emotion recognition by looking at things like facial expressions, body language, speech bubbles and so forth. And for older students, you can engage them in discussions about conflicts or ethical situations that occur in a book where a character maybe had to make a tough choice and deal with the positive or negative consequences of that action. And I won't go over these in a ton of detail, but I've included some example questions on the right. And the type of thing you can ask students is, how would you feel if you were in that situation? What would you do? Do you think that was a good or bad idea? And it's important to remember when you're doing an activity like this that you shouldn't judge students' responses, even if it's very much not what you would do. But you can ask them to sort of explain their thinking and encourage them to think about cause and effect. And you can also engage them in a dialogue where you share your own opinions and perspectives, and you can have a discussion about where you may agree or disagree about how to handle a situation. And that also helps with perspective taking for them. And so with that, I know I sort of raced through those very quickly. So to summarize what I just shared with you, we went over tips for creating a safe and supporting learning environment that facilitates SEL. We shared some strategies for being your best self versus your stressed self in order to model effective stress management for students and also ensure that you're creating a positive learning environment for SEL. We suggested check-ins to help build a positive relationship with your student and get to know each other. Think alouds are a really great way to model SEL skills and strategies in real time. And then iMessages and cool down strategies are great for supporting students' emotion regulation so that they can focus on the learning at hand and also stay calm and control negative emotions or even positive emotions. Sometimes you can get too excited and you have to know how to regulate that down. And then lastly, I shared with you the WOOP method and some questions that you can use when you're reading or writing that help integrate SEL with academics during a tutoring session. And so finally, I just wanted to share with you some additional resources. If you're looking for information about SEL or more evidence-based tips and strategies, I think the CASEL Explore SEL and Committee for Children websites are really great for helping you dive deeper into what SEL is, some of the outcomes that are tied to it, some best practices for integrating it into your setting. And then Character Lab has some sort of great bite-sized activities that might be time-efficient ways to incorporate SEL into your tutoring beyond what I've shared today. And then the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley also has a magazine that sort of shares popular articles about these kinds of things that are written in really sort of easy to understand ways. And then I believe they also have activities that are tied to these skills that they discuss that can be used both in tutoring and at home. And then finally, as promised, I've provided the links to the WOOP method, instructions, templates, and app. And so that is the end of my presentation. And I just want to say thank you to the staff at the EASEL Lab where I work, who helped me put together these slides and let me pull from materials and trainings that they've given before. And so with that, I just want to say thanks, and I can pass it back to Katie for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. That was illuminating. Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask? You can type them in the question pane right now. We have a couple, but I just want to let you guys know that now is the time if you want to ask others. Yeah, Katie, so the first question we have is, what would you suggest if a student refuses to do work at all or gives up really easily without trying?
Yeah. So I do just want to preface again that I am not a behavior management coach. So that is not my exact area of expertise, but I think it could be a good idea to sort of find out why they don't want to do work. And so it might help to sort of do that relationship building aspect of things before you can even get into the tutoring side of things. So I don't know what School on Wheels would say to this, but I think if you need to use a whole session to sort of, or multiple sessions to sort of help that student feel comfortable before you get to doing work, to learn sort of about what is making them shut down and what sort of strategies and skills they need to help motivate them. That would be where I would start, I think. And then you can sort of find the targeted resources that they need to help them begin feeling comfortable to do work and work with you.
Excellent. Yeah. No, School on Wheels doesn't have any problem with that. I think the relationship building is very important. Cool. Okay, so we have another question here. How can you employ these strategies when working with more than one child at a time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I specifically, these strategies are actually designed to be used in group settings as well. And I specifically sort of pared them down to make them appropriate for one-on-one situations. But it's actually really great to build SEL in a group because sort of everything we do is in a social context anyway. And so I would say that it can really help to sort of make them part of the positive norms of, if you're doing a group tutoring session, you can sort of use that same strategy of building norms together as a group and sort of make these strategies that you should all use with each other. And then I didn't include them in this presentation, but there's a lot of games that you can actually play that help build like attention and focus and teamwork that are a really great way to sort of begin a session. So sort of like welcome everybody to the room, do a game together, and then go start doing your work. And I can definitely provide resources to those. I know there's things out there called brain games that work really well, but I'm definitely happy to follow up with some more group strategies if that is helpful.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm sure everyone would love to have a little resource document for, where to find more information on those games.
Sure.
Yeah. So we have one more question for you. How would you go about sort of, introducing this stuff to your students if you get a why? Why are we doing this? Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that I think it's important to start with the why, even if they don't ask you. So I think that's a really good question. And I would say that it's really important to be explicit about the really specific ways that a skill can help a student in their actual lives. So if you're going to have them use an iMessage, you could even use an iMessage to tell them sort of why it's important to you to hear things communicated to you clearly and respectfully, how that helps you respond to them better, how it can help them communicate with their teachers and their friends and their parents. And so I would really just start there with explaining how that skill is going to have value to them and help them in the future if they can get really good at it.
Awesome. Wonderful. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and say that's the end. um, Thank you so much for doing this, Katie. And thank all of you, the participants, for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed this experience as much as I did. Um, and we will have some resources available for you guys within, a week or so. This has been recorded, and so it will be up online, and you will all be notified when that happens. I also hope you guys are interested in joining us for another upcoming webinar. Um, Two of our staff members will be talking to all of us about ways to help students navigate post-traumatic stress during tutoring. And details will be found on our events calendar very shortly. So keep an eye out. Everyone have a lovely day, and thank you again, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to do this.
All right.